Hey guys, and welcome to today's weight loss webinar. In today's webinar, we'll be talking about hormones and fat loss and what you can do about it. But before we get into today's session, let's recap what we did last week. We spoke about exercise, and I gave you guys an exercise to do for exercise, funnily enough, which is to record the exercise that you did all week. How'd you go with that? Also, did you try something new? And did you push yourself? So today, this is what we're going to be reviewing. There are 4 big reasons why some people don't lose weight and probably never will unless these reasons are addressed. The good news is there are some very simple things that we can all do to overcome these reasons and get the results we've worked so hard to achieve. More and more people are suffering physically and physiologically from the ravages of being overweight and obese. It's not people that are changing, but rather the choices made available to us, plus the lack of access to key information that could allow us to all be slender for life. Have you given up on losing weight? Many overweight people have a deep-seated frustration. Totally understand. We hear disturbingly consistent sets of complaints and negative self-talk, and maybe some of these sound familiar. I'm doing everything right and still can't lose weight. I feel hopeless and depressed. Not only do I look old, I feel old. Go out? I don't want to go out. I don't want people to see me. I don't want to buy new clothes. What's the point? I just don't feel valuable. I'll never look good again. This is out of control. How big will I get? What's wrong with me? There's so many different statements, guys, and the pain and suffering behind all of these sorts of statements makes too many people simply give up on their dream of being slim and feeling good again. Does this look like a familiar pattern? Your hormones may be standing like a brick wall between you and your goals, but there's a way to smash through that wall, lose the weight, and be in control of your life again. It's not too grim. Fat burning barrier number 1. Not enough adiponectin. Adiponectin is literally the hormone that tells your body to burn fat for fuel. It's like your body's fat burning torch. Multiple studies have shown that the more of this super hormone you have circulating in your bloodstream, the more fat you burn. And research also shows that low levels of adiponectin are associated with a higher incidence of obesity. The frustrating thing about adiponectin is that the more fat you have, the lower your levels, which is why losing fat is so difficult at the beginning. So fat burning barrier number 2 is too much ghrelin. So ghrelin is a hormone that keeps you famished and running to the fridge, especially at night. We all know what that's like, which is the worst possible time to be overeating. Ghrelin is called the hunger hormone, and basically the more ghrelin you have in your system, the hungrier you are going to be. So if you find yourself fighting cravings and can't seem to stay away from the fridge after dinner, it's probably due to elevated ghrelin levels. And the hard fact is that ghrelin works directly on the hunger center of your brain by activating the brain's reward response to highly addictive sweet and fatty foods. This increases your food intake at the worst possible time, which is usually at night, and ultimately makes you gain more weight. Even worse, it appears ghrelin makes us fatter whether we eat more or not. So you can see why losing fat is almost impossible with elevated ghrelin levels. But if you thought ghrelin was bad news for your waistline, you need to see what's being dubbed as the fat storage hormone. Enter barrier number 3. High levels of blood sugar equal high levels of insulin. If you're overweight, there's a good chance that you're experiencing some level of insulin imbalance, resulting in excess glucose or sugar in your system. While this doesn't necessarily mean that you're diabetic, it does mean that your body's insulin or glucose regulator becomes less effective at lowering your blood sugars. The end result is that instead of using the excess sugar to feed your muscles or burning it for energy, most of the carbohydrate you consume actually gets stored as fat. It sucks. It's simple. If you have insulin resistance, it makes it virtually impossible to lose fat. And finally, fat burning barrier number 4, a cortisol overload. Your body produces cortisol in response to stress and ramps you up so you can be ready to fight or flee, basically. The constant stress we're all under today, it's really hectic, 24/7, it's crisis driven. We've got elevated cortisols far beyond what we originally designed to handle. Now, obviously cortisol can be good in dangerous situations, like if you were to run across an escaping tiger while you're at the zoo. But the reality is the result of cortisol elevation, it's a quadruple whammy on your waistline. Because number 1, excess cortisol increases your cravings for sweets and carbs, which can lead to overeating and constant hunger. Number 2, cortisol causes your body to actually break down your muscle tissue for energy. This is not what we want. This is absolutely the worst thing for weight loss, since the muscle you have, once it decreases, the lower your metabolism will be and the more fat you'll gain. Number 3, elevated cortisol levels cause a larger percentage of fat to be stored in the abdominal area. I can always identify clients that are stressed because they have elevated cortisol, and you can tell by the way their fat is distributed. What's worse is that the more abdominal fat you have, the more cortisol you end up producing in response to stress, which causes more abdominal fat to be stored. And you can see there's a bit of a vicious cycle. And finally, number 4, recent studies link high cortisol levels to depression in adults and children. And we all know that when you're depressed, you're going to actually eat more. So that's all the hormonal bad news that we've got for today. How about some good news? There are things you can do easily and naturally. So, a method for naturally boosting your adiponectin levels and stocking your fat-burning fire sounds pretty good, right? Increase your magnesium intake, right? The best sources are through green leafy veggies, which have the added benefit of being really filling, and they assist with weight loss. Some people like to take magnesium supplement. I take one of those as well. If this is you, make sure it's magnesium glycinate or chelated magnesium, as these are readily absorbed by the body. Other forms of magnesium may be just wasting your money, as they're not really that readily absorbed. Natural ghrelin busting tip. Okay, new research makes it clear that even low levels of sleep deprivation increase your ghrelin levels and lead to more fat being stored in your body. Most people need between 7 and 8 hours of sleep, but unfortunately, revving yourself up in the morning with caffeine or energy drinks is exactly the wrong thing to do if you want to lose weight, which you'll see why in just a moment on the next slide. There's a surprisingly simple trick to addressing the excess glucose problem. The thing that causes sugar in the blood to rise is eating sugar and all foods which are broken down to sugar, i.e. carbohydrates. Also, I lied. It's on the next slide that we're going to talk a bit more about the ghrelin thing and the caffeine link. So the key to reducing sugar in the blood is to reduce sugar and carbs of all sorts in the diet. Important. Now, if you've got high levels of cortisol, here are some simple tips you can start using immediately to reduce your cortisol levels naturally. So a couple of slides back, remember we were mentioning that caffeine is the wrong way to get started in the morning, yeah? Caffeine increases cortisol secretion in people undergoing mental stress. For many of us, that's just about all the time. This is why a single cup of coffee may be okay for many people, but if sleep and stress are problems for you, it's probably better to avoid caffeine altogether. Obviously, caffeine is not the only problem. Those with high stress and high cortisol need to find ways to reduce stress, or at least reduce their body's negative response to stress. Some stress is good. Some stress gets us doing things. Obviously, as we mentioned before, if you're in a situation and you need to flee or fight or whatever, stress is good. It's called eustress. But distress is not good. And distress can lead to fat increase. So really good exercise that many people use to reduce stress fast is sort of mentioned on this slide. So as you're sitting there, simply hold in through your nose and count to 4. Breathe in, and hold it. And then breathe out through your belly until it's comfortable, and pause. So you want to breathe in through your nose and count to 4, then hold it. Through your belly, you should feel it expand, and let the air out through your mouth until it's comfortable, and then pause at the bottom. And just do that 8 times, because if you can do that 8 times, you'll end up resetting your stress response. When you're in the moment and you're breathing, it's almost impossible to be stressed. So what are you going to do this week? The first thing is to follow an eating plan without deviation, focusing on your green leafy veggies, guys. So focusing on making sure we're increasing our intake. The second is to sleep well. And if you currently don't sleep well, next week's seminar is going to be for you. Make sure you record the amount of sleep you get. If you've got a daily planner and you're on the Diet Flex system, suggestion is to use your daily planner and write it down. If not, find somewhere you can keep track of your sleep. And the third thing, and this is perhaps the most important, is to avoid all sugar and high carb foods. Reduce whatever stresses you can, guys, this week. For those of you who can't get rid of stress, work on ways to minimize your reaction to any stressful situation. As always, I do look forward to, seeing your comments, finding out what you did and how you went. And I want to thank you for joining me again this week for our weight loss webinar. And we'll catch up next week. Look after yourselves and see you then.